Hey, welcome to week 2 of this 4-week study of the Prodigal Son for our Wednesday night Refuel program. Once again, we are in Luke chapter 15. As a recap, Jesus was eating with some sinners, and the Pharisees stumble upon this and begin to complain. Why does Jesus eat with them? Why does he spend more time with them than with us? They think this is a them and us story, and Jesus calls them out on that assumption by telling a series of parables in which someone notices that something of value is missing, and then they do the hard work in order to gain that thing back. And when they get that thing back, they celebrate and invite others to celebrate with them. So there's a shepherd that goes after the one lost sheep, and there's a woman who sweeps her whole house to find one lost coin. And then in verse 11, Jesus begins to expand on this theme. And then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. There was a man who had 2 sons. This story of 2 sons is the story of Israel. All throughout Genesis, leading up to Moses, it's stories about 2 sons. It's Cain and Abel. It's Ishmael and Isaac. It's Esau and Jacob. It's all of the older brothers versus Joseph. It's Aaron and Moses. It's always about 2 sons and the drama that comes through this. Now, this story automatically raises all sorts of questions. What kind of son would demand this from his father? And what sort of father would allow this? But weird family dynamics is just part of the Israelites' story. In fact, like Joseph and David, it turns out it may just be the misfit of the family that God is going to work through in order to bless the whole family. Picking up the story in verse 13. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. It's amazing how we can see in this story how bad decisions can affect our identity. The younger son has made a series of bad decisions, and when he comes to himself, he realizes, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. Bad decisions can begin to affect our identity. And what we see is the Father restoring the identity. Now, for some of us, rock bottom is a holy, sacred, divine, and godly place. It's only when we come to the end of ourselves, when our plans fall apart, when we come to the end of what we can control within our own power, do we then turn to something larger than ourselves, bigger than our plans, and stronger than our own power? For some of us, rock bottom is the holiest place that we could ever be. And he came to himself, says verse 17. He came to himself. He owned his stuff. He prepared his confession. Verse 20 says this. So the younger son set off and went to return to his father. But while he was still a far way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to the father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer to be called your son. And the father does not have time to listen to the rest of his confession. Verse 22, but the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. This story, it's important to note, is a story about redemption, not salvation. A lot of us think of this as a primary gospel story, but there is no cross here. This is a story about identity being returned. It's a story about redemption, not salvation. Now, the younger son has the greatest character arc. He goes from traditionally being seen as the antagonist, as being the problem of the story, to returning home into this glory, but he's not the hero of the story. The father is. It is the father who's the one who restores his identity. It's the father who says, you have never stopped being my son, and you will never stop being my son. And so this first part of the parable has this call to action. Be like the father. Restore people's identities. There are people out there who have had bad decisions happen to them and bad decisions made in their own power, but have now hit rock bottom. And what they need to hear more than anything else is you never stopped being God's child, and you never will stop being a child of God. It turns out that parenting is this holy, sacred, divine, godly act. And so the pattern continues. Something of value was missing, and someone did the work necessary to gain that back. And when that thing returns, they celebrate. Now, traditionally, the way we understand this is the younger son represents the sinners that Jesus was eating with, and the elder son represents the Pharisees that are complaining about Jesus spending so much time with the sinners. And the father then becomes the God character. But continuing the pattern on, if the father is the God character, if parenting is a holy, sacred, divine, godly act, so is going after the lost, just like the shepherd going after the lost one, leaving the 99. But also, and probably the story we jump over the most, this God character in these parables is also played by a woman who simply picks up her broom and sweeps the house, cleaning the house, getting things in order, getting your own house in order is a godly, sacred, divine, holy act as well. Many of us have been stuck indoors because of this COVID pandemic. Sweeping your home, running the vacuum can be a sacred, holy, divine, godly act. And we need to claim that truth as well. Now let's turn to verse 25. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the slaves and asked, "What is going on?" And he replied, "Your brother has come back. Your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has gotten him back safe and sound." And then the elder son became angry, and he refused to go in. And his father came out and began to plead with him. The father, in his grace and compassion, runs to the younger son, has to go to the younger son. But the father also has to go to the elder son as well. His father came out and began to plead with him. See, the elder son has let his anger get in the way of experiencing joy. Have we ever let our anger get in the way of experiencing joy? Verse 29. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you. I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him?" Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we have to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." Let's make a couple notes about the elder son. The elder son has a misinformed identity of the father. He sees his father, and because his father represents grace here, he sees his father and grace as being weak and dumb. His father allowed the younger son to devour the property with prostitutes. The fact that he's throwing a party for this son shows his idioticness in all of this. Why would we celebrate? Why would we throw parties for someone that has brought your name and my name and the family name into such disgrace? The elder son has a misinformed identity of the father. The elder son also has misplaced imagination. I mean, look at what he says. He has thought more richly about his own brother's sins than what he would do if he threw his own party. I mean, when he begins to think about a party, all he can think about is a young goat. I mean, that's not even enough to feed maybe 2 or 3 people at most. What kind of party is that? But he knows exactly how this younger son has spent his money. How does he know that? He is purely speculating. His imagination has run wild on how the younger son has spent the money, how the younger son has destroyed his share of the property, how the younger son has spent nights and times with parties and prostitutes. The elder son has a misplaced imagination. The elder son has also misidentified the problem. The elder son says, "Look, Dad, your son. But when the father talks back to the elder son in verse 32, he says, no, this brother of yours. You think the problem is my son, but it's not. It's your brother that we're talking about. We are called to be each other's brothers' keepers." That comes from another story, an earlier story about 2 sons, doesn't it? Cain and Abel. Finally, the elder son is just as lost as the younger son was. When the elder son begins to speak things of identity, he says, "I've been working like a slave for you." He too sees himself no worthy of being a son, but sees himself as being a servant, as a slave for his father. And so the father says, "Son," in verse 31, "Son, you are always with me. All that I have is mine. You are my son." Some of us have to travel far to get lost, and some of us can get lost in the safety of our own home. Whether we are the younger son or the elder son, we need to remember that we are indeed sons of the Father, that we are beloved children of God, that we are always with the Father, and all that the Father has is ours. And so the only thing left is to come to the party. Come to the party. Amen, amen, amen.